And we listen carefully to see, well, although they've had this experience, they are open-minded here, they are going to be fair. Now, all that being said, how does that relate to your evangelism? Well, I think it's very, very similar as Christians. We have to look at people who are willing to give this explanation a fair shake. And you can usually tell when someone just is really not going to listen to anything you're going to say. As a matter of fact, there are times when I think one of the best questions we can ask is a question that Frank Turek and I often ask when we are dealing with folks who are not believers. Hey, if this was true, if Christianity was true, would you accept it? Would you believe it? And we've even had people in the college setting, when we're speaking around the country at different universities, when we ask that question, they'll really express hesitancy. Even if it was true, they wouldn't believe it. Well, okay, that's okay. If you hear that, you know that there's somebody who is not open-minded enough. That's a good question to ask. What would it take for you to believe this is true? And sometimes I'll hear a response from people who I'm discussing this with that seems to me to really lock in the fact that they're just not open-minded. That there's no set of evidences, there's no evidence that could be powerful enough to persuade some people because their mind is they've already decided they're closed to this. Again, this does not mean that I am going to not share what I believe. I'm going to actually be more tactful in the way I share it. I'm going to ask those kinds of probing questions and then ask maybe, why do you think, it sounds to me like you're so closed to this idea. What really closed you down to begin with? Was it something you experienced? Was it something someone said? Was it something about the evidence itself that gives you these? I want to ask better questions to see why this person is shut down to this and they're not open-minded to begin with. The other thing too is I think when you get to a place with people, and again, if we believe Christianity is true, then we believe there is a God accurately described in the Christian scripture. And that God is a powerful God. And sometimes, if we're not careful, as case makers who we've looked at so much evidence, and I'm an evidentialist in every aspect of my life, I have to be careful not to deny the supernatural power of God. It's not all about my case-making ability. In fact, it's all about God's power. And so when I find someone who's just not open-minded to the case for Christ that I'm about to present, it doesn't mean I can really win this guy by being, leaning more into the evidence or being more articulate about the evidence. If this is a matter of whether or not the person has an open heart or a closed heart to the evidence altogether, the way to open or close that is not by presenting more evidence. The way to open or close that, I think, is about prayer. It's about reaching out to the powerful God that we believe exists, knowing that if anyone can change this, it's not going to be you and your power of persuasion. It's going to be the power of God to open up an opportunity for you to share. I do not believe that we do this on our own, and I do believe that God actually allows us the privilege of being a part of the process. But sometimes I think we find ourselves thinking that we can open someone's mind by being more persuasive or trying harder, when in fact, of course, this is not something that happens that way. This is really about the power of God. So I would ask two questions of myself if I encounter somebody who seems to be closed-minded. Number one, have I done something? I am responsible, at least. Have I behaved in a certain way? Am I the cause of this closed-mindedness? Number one. If that could often be the case, I'm closed-minded because if it's you, Jim, I don't like you, and I don't like the way you've been around me, and I don't like what you represent, and therefore I don't want to hear anything from you. Is that what this is about? I need to ask myself that question and make sure I'm not the reason why someone's closed-minded. And then number two, have I been praying about this? Have I been asking God to do the thing that it seems to me God is best at? I'm not good at. I can't open someone's heart to this, but God could. And allow then my presentation of the case to be powerful and influential because God has done something before me and something that's foundationally more powerful than I am. And so that's the thing I would ask us to do if that's the case. So two things we've covered: passion, open-mindedness. We'll take a break. We'll come back and I'll give you the third component I think you have to have when selecting a jury.
Be sure to download the free Cold Case Christianity app from the iTunes Store and the Android Marketplace. The Cold Case Christianity app puts all the resources from coldcasechristianity.com in the palm of your hand. You can read the daily blog, listen to podcasts, and watch videos from within the application. And Jim uses the app to send direct messages to fans of Cold Case Christianity. The app will also link you to all Cold Case Christianity social media and provide you with a direct connection to J. Warner Wallace. Download the app today and become a better Christian casemaker.
Okay, here's the third characteristic I'm looking for in jury selection. I need humble jurors. Pride is a huge issue. This is often the case in my trials. My trials are very complex. They're circumstantial cases. They're cold cases from the past. I don't typically have great forensic evidence. I don't typically have an eyewitness who can tell me what happened. I don't have the luxury of those things. My cases are puzzle pieces that come together in a certain way. And I need people who are smart and articulate and are patient and are all those things, but they have to have passion, because this is going to be a long case. They have to be passionate enough to be able to dig deep and put the case together in a certain way. I need folks who are open-minded enough so their prejudice will not, or their past experiences will not preclude the thing we're trying to prove. And finally, I need folks who won't get so swelled up and think they know more than my expert witnesses, think they know more than the prosecutor, think they know more than the case agent, the detectives who are involved in this case. And you might think, well, that shouldn't be all that hard, right? Oh, really? I'll give you an example of this. If I had a case that was so specialized that I was going to have to call in an expert, and maybe an electrical expert. Maybe I've got a case of sabotage in which somebody set a fire or set an electrical fire or somehow sabotaged something electronically. And so as part of my case, I'm going to call in an expert from Quantico, Virginia, from the FBI, who's going to come in and testify about the nature of this kind of electrical sabotage. And so he's got he's going to be some kind of a highly educated specialist, criminalist who's trained in electricity. I don't know, something like that. Well, I can tell you this. If I'm picking my jury weeks before the trial begins, the person's actually going to testify, the expert's going to testify, and I discover that one person on my jury is an electrician, I'm just going to tell you personally, I'm going to be very cautious about placing an electrician on a panel that eventually is going to have to hear from an expert on electrician stuff. And here's why. What I've discovered is that people who think they know a little bit about something really become quite difficult when push comes to shove, because they end up being prideful, and their pride can be in the way. They're not humble enough to say, well, yeah, that guy's an expert and I'm not. No, I'm an expert. I'm an electrician. He's wrong. I've had a couple of cases that weren't quite like that. And all of a sudden, he wants to be the specialist in the jury deliberations. Rather than let the jurors evaluate what the expert said, he wants to weigh in with his own expertise. Pride can derail things, and I'm very careful not to pick people in my jury that might even have the temptation of pride because they share some bit of expertise that might cause you to puff up. Look, there's a reason why Scripture is pretty clear about how people resist pride. God resists the proud, but you do too. There's nothing more irritating than somebody who's prideful and is a know-it-all, right? And so I think that's what we're looking for here, is we have to be very careful. I do not impanel people on my jury that are going to end up having some expertise that I'm going to see later as an expert. Now, don't you know that when we are talking to our friends and to even strangers online, oh my gosh, don't you see the same kind of thing happening? You get somebody who knows a little bit about science, and you don't know who these folks are. They're tweeting back and forth to you in 140 characters, or they're on Facebook and they're pumping out paragraphs. They're cutting and pasting from some website to make their case. And for all you know, they're PhD'd in this topic, or they were posing as somebody who's PhD'd in this topic. But if they think they've got a little bit of information, do you know how hard it is to talk to somebody, for example, who believes that Jesus never lived because they've bought into the internet lines, the internet information related to, say, Mithras or Osiris, and how Jesus is so similar to these prior deities. And because they think they have a little knowledge, they become almost impossible to communicate with, right? Because they've researched this after all, because they read 4 websites. Okay, I get that. It's easy for any of us to think we're becoming an expert in a field if we've read an internet article. By the way, that goes both ways. Not just for those who we're talking to who are atheists who would steal this information out from some website and say, hey, now I'm an expert in this online, as they're typing to you. But I think we have a tendency to do the same thing when we read something briefly and we think we have a solid case and we haven't taken the time to really dig deeper. And we all can do this. We're all guilty of it. There are times when we need a quick response. We go to a place we trust. Maybe that place for some reason is errant on this issue, and somebody you've trusted forever, you're now using that information and you happen to be wrong. My point, though, is You know very well that sometimes a little bit of information can close down the channel of communication because we become so arrogant as to think we're know-it-alls now. That's what I'm very careful about when I deal with people online and when I deal with people in my world. I want to empty out that information with people, let them tell me everything they know, and I'm very careful not to hit your expertise versus my expertise. Has that ever really worked for you? It doesn't usually work. I'm not going to puff up bigger when that person's puffing up. When I recognize there's that kind of pride involved. How many times do you know somebody, for example, who's willing to change their view after they've come out publicly and written a website about this other view or a book about their view? Are they really likely now to change their view? I think pride would pretty much stop them from doing so. You'd have to admit at least that at some point in the past, I was wrong. Wow. I'm looking for people. This whole idea of repentance requires you first to admit that you've been doing something you shouldn't be doing and that you want to change this. You need to change this. You are wrong and you want to admit you're wrong and go a new way. Just to be repentant requires a certain amount of submission, a certain amount of dispelling of arrogance to go forward, right? Okay. So what I'm looking for is for people who aren't so saturated in their pride. You know, for example, people who are self-made men or women, people who are self-made, they've done it all on their own. They become prideful, and it's really hard to reach someone like that, right? That's why sometimes God will break people down first so that the message comes clearly because the pride is no longer in the equation. So what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for people who aren't so arrogant or overconfident they can't be reached. Also, if you're talking to somebody like this, I want you to take a minute to examine your own attitude. Or sometimes I wonder if I'm not the reason why somebody is puffing up. Am I the reason why somebody is becoming prideful? They're sensing my pride and they are just kind of mirroring, reflecting back to me what I'm showing to them. I want to be careful about that because sometimes that pride you're seeing really isn't so much their pride, it's your own pride reflected in them. So I think that's also, by the way, not uncommon when we're making a case for something, right? Because if I'm going to give you the 5 reasons why I think this is true, well, then I have to at least think in my own mind, I'm somebody who has those 5 reasons. I actually have the truth. I know something that I want to share with you. You can see how this can be very easily move into a prideful kind of, let me tell you something, young man. Let me tell you what you don't know. That's the danger, I think, sometimes in making the case. One way to dispel the pride issue is simply let them do most of the talking. Ask good questions. Listen carefully to what they tell you. And don't try to offer so much so quickly. Let them empty out what they believe first. Don't be the source that people mirror back and become prideful because you're being prideful. All right. In the end, 3 things I'm looking for: passion, open-mindedness, and a humble spirit. Those are the 3 things I'm looking for in jurors because those folks are teachable, open to all the possibilities, and they are passionately interested to come and find the truth. That's a great juror for a jury panel. That's also a great juror when you're trying to make the case for what you believe as a Christian. So I hope that those attributes that I see in jurors will also be important for you to discover in the people you're talking to about the Christian worldview. Hope that helps. And I'll see you right here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.